Hi mamas, some of the most frequent questions that I get asked by moms is how do they know what stage of labor they are in and what do they do during those stages of labor? In today's video, I'm going to explain each stage of labor, what to do, and what labor positions to be in to help labor progress. My name is Caitlin Stowe and I am a certified childbirth educator as well as a birth doula, and I'm so excited to jump in today's video to prepare you for your labor. That way you can have a positive and beautiful birth. So before we get started talking about each stage of labor, I want to answer the question of how do you know what stage of labor you're in? So we can tell what stage of labor you're in through a few different methods, and I'd say that the one you probably know and the most common is through cervical checks. With a cervix check, your medical provider will do this exam by checking on your cervix, usually with their fingers. And in this check of your cervix, they will basically be looking for dilation and effacement. So dilation is the opening of your cervix, and that would be on a scale from 0 to 10 centimeters. And effacement is the thinning out of your cervix from 0 to 100% is usually how they'll rate this. So we want your cervix to be at 10 centimeters dilated and 100% effaced until you can have your baby. So in other words, basically just the readiness of your cervix for baby to come through. So a small thing about cervical exams is they are by no means necessary and can actually be invasive to some moms. So it's totally okay to avoid cervical checks if you don't want them. The only time that I would recommend for sure having a cervix check is before an induction. That way you can see where your cervix is at in terms of, again, readiness like I was talking about. That way you can know what method of induction is going to be the best for you. There have even been different studies that have shown that cervical exams are not the most efficient or the best way of checking on where mom is at during labor. However, they can be efficient and they are a great tool to see this if that's something that mom wants. But they shouldn't be the only means of her checking how progressed labor is. And I say this because sometimes moms can go from a 2 to a 10 as far as centimeters dilated in 30 minutes or 30 hours. So you just never really know, and it's not something that you should really be basing your labor progression off of because it's not, again, the only method that I think should be looked at. So we can also check where your labor progression is and what stage of labor you're in through ultrasound. So during an ultrasound, we can check where baby is. Baby's positioning can also show you where you are at in labor. We can also tell by how mom is feeling. So this is not always a sure sign, but it can definitely be another tool to see. So how is mom acting? What sounds is she making? How's her breathing? Is she breathing loudly? Is she holding her breath? Is she panting? What's her response to contractions? Is she making loud noises? Is she grunting? How deep, how intense are these noises? Is she chatting between contractions? So these are all other ways to tell where you're at in labor too, as far as just behavior goes. And then we can also tell through your contraction patterns. So again, labor is on a relative scale where some moms will have really kind of by the book contractions as far as timing goes, but others might not always have that. So sometimes early labor can last a long time, and I've worked with a mom before that has had early labor only been about an hour and a half as a first-time mom. So there's really, again, just a really large scale of what is considered to be normal, but we can look at a typical contraction pattern here as well. But I also want to remind you that we don't necessarily need to focus and put all of our attention on where you're at in labor. So baby is going to come, we know that for sure. And again, we can't really put a time to labor because everyone is so different. Even if you have given birth before, this next one can be so incredibly different in terms of the length and the time, how long you're in each stage for. So again, I wouldn't put too much emphasis into labor progression because your labor is still going to progress. Let's go ahead and jump into early labor. Early labor can be classified as 0 to 5 centimeters dilated, and again, cervical check, a great tool in order to see where mom's at. But again, it's not the only tool to show how labor is progressing. And I'm going to say these stages of labor in terms of centimeters dilated, just so that way you can have an idea. But again, cervical checks are not necessary, and there are other ways to tell where you're at: early labor, active labor, transition, and so on. So specifically early labor from 0 to 5 centimeters. In terms of what to expect, it may feel like period cramp. Sometimes it can even start as a little bit more similar to Braxton Hicks contractions, which is that tightening. But the difference here is it'll also have a little bit more crampy feeling as it continues, and this could start in your back and wrap around to your stomach, especially your lower stomach. So this tightening or these contractions can come every 10 to 20 minutes. They are typically inconsistent if we're looking at that pattern. Contraction intensity can change here as well. So that's totally normal, but it will start to kind of ramp up. It'll feel a little bit more than just like your Braxton Hicks contraction. So what to do in early labor? My biggest piece of advice, no matter what time of day that you start going into early labor, is to rest. So a lot of moms will end up wanting to really do anything they can to kickstart contractions, make sure that things are going, but I am a firm believer in your body and your baby know best, and you can't really rush that. Coming from someone who did try to get my baby to come, which is a story for another day, but I did learn firsthand that it can be so exhausting to just try to get baby to come and get labor to start or continue. So listen to your body. As hard as it can be, just know that it knows what it's doing, your baby knows what it's doing, and your baby's going to come when they're ready. If it's at nighttime that you start to go into labor, which is actually pretty common, that a lot of moms can start going into labor in the evening or the nighttime, my biggest piece of advice would be to sleep through the contractions for as long as you can, and make sure that your birth partner is also sleeping during this time, as long as you're not needing that physical support yet, because we really want your birth partner to also be rested and relax as much as they can, because in all reality, sometimes when you're in early labor, you could be preparing for a long journey here, and that is okay. Again, there's no timetable when it comes to birth or to labor, so just prepare yourself really for anything. And let's say if this is going to be something that takes a long time, you're gonna want to be well rested as much as you can be. You're also gonna want your partner to be well rested as well. If it is during the daytime that you start to go into early labor, again, rest, take a nap, maybe lounge on the couch, watch a show, ignore your contractions until you can't anymore. One of the things that I highly recommend too is to make sure that you're eating and hydrating. So drink lots of water, coconut water even, things with electrolytes are gonna be fantastic. You're eating carbohydrates, just good snacks, things that will kind of give you energy and fuel, almost as if, again, we are preparing for that marathon of labor and birth. As you are in early labor and you're starting to experience these contractions, and they might start to get a little bit more intense, another piece of advice I have for you is to really start identifying where your tension in your body is, so that way you know kind of your patterns during contractions. Maybe you're tensing in your shoulders, so really focus on relaxing and breathing. In my previous video, I did have a breathing technique, but you can watch that. You can look up different breathing techniques, but biggest thing to start here is to be aware of your breath and aware of your body. So body scans, seeing again where tension is being held, where tension is being held, how you're breathing. These would be things that I'd start focusing on in early labor, so you can see just how your body's responding to these contractions, because most likely that's going to be a habit you start. So again, if we're really, really tense during contractions and holding our breath, all we're doing is essentially setting ourselves up for failure further on as these contractions get more intense. So really practice getting in the habit and mindset of breathing through them and doing those body scans so you can make sure you're not holding on to a lot of tension. If your labor starts to stall during early labor, again, Your body knows what it's doing, and there could be for sure a reason that it's stalling. You're not going to fail to progress at any point during labor. Your body knows what it's doing. But let's say labor does start to stall. You could try to do something called a mile circuit. You can look this up. The first time I heard this, I was like, you want me to run miles while I'm pregnant? There's no way I'm doing that, but that's not what this is. So a mile circuit is essentially just a series of positions that you can be in to kind of help baby get into the right position and help labor basically kind of kick into gear a little bit more. So mile circuit is one of those things that you could do. You can also just try to boost oxytocin. So I've talked about before that oxytocin is the major birth hormone that essentially just keeps birth going. You might know oxytocin as the love and bonding hormone, which it totally is, and when you're in labor, we want to do things that boost that. So just creating a calm and safe environment and a loving, supportive environment by your birth partner, just essentially anything you need to get you kind of in that feel-good mindset is something that can also really help labor progress here. So as you're in early labor here and things are starting to pick up, you might have heard of the 5-1-1 rule. So this would be to, if you're going to the hospital, or if you're at home, when to necessarily like call your midwife or your doula. I'd say in either scenario, no matter where you're giving birth at, definitely start giving your birth team a heads up so they know where you're at in early labor. But that 5-1-1 rule is essentially when contractions start to become 3 to 5 minutes apart. They last for an entire minute for at least 1 hour is usually when they say you start to get into active labor. Again, everyone can be a little bit different here, but generally if you're looking again at the pattern of contractions, we can go to this 5-1-1 or 3-1-1 rule to see that most likely you will be more centimeters dilated at this point heading into active labor, which is where most hospitals will end up taking you. So let's say you do end up going to the hospital. If you are in triage, most of the time that's where they set you to check where you're at, how many centimeters dilated you are, and typically if you are 3 centimeters or less, they might send you home. And if that's the case, it's not a failure. Try not to be discouraged. Just go home. Again, rest as much as you can, eat snacks, hydrate, and labor will start to progress. As far as labor positions, the way that I'm gonna go over them is in categories of standing positions, sitting positions, being on all fours, and lying down. And the reason why I am talking about these positions and why I'm recommending them is because it's all about the space in your pelvis. So how can we make space in the pelvis for baby to descend depending on what stage of labor you are in? So we're going to talk about the inlet, the mid pelvis, and the outlet. So if we're thinking of the pelvis, basically at the top of the pelvis, we want to create more space for baby to descend and to get into the pelvis. So early labor is all about opening the inlet, the top of the pelvis. So what positions can we be in to essentially create space at the top for baby to start to come down? We want to think positions that we have wide knees, so knees wider than the ankles, and the tailbone tucked. So when we're leaning back and tucking the tailbone, we are just again creating more space in the top of the pelvis. Same thing when our knees are wide, we're opening up the pelvis. Again, we want to encourage restful positions. You are preparing your body for potentially long labor, so we want to do things that don't require a lot of energy. So in terms of standing, we can be swaying our hips back and forth. We can also leaning over. We could be holding on to your birth partner. Again, just whatever feels good. And I will preface to say too that intuitive movement is always best. Low squatting position can be another standing one. So when we're in this low squat, we can be holding on to someone if you want to and kind of leaning back into that squat, or holding on to something. Our knees wider than your ankles, and leaning back into it. More seated positions, again, because we want to be restful here. So maybe it is sitting on the couch, leaning back, sitting with your legs crossed. That would be knees wider than ankles. Or sitting on your birth ball with your knees out wider than your ankles, doing some hip sways or hip circles. We can really have you be in any position here when you're sitting, just as long as your knees are wider. You can even be leaning back into your birth partner if you like. That could boost some oxytocin. Maybe you're getting a massage here, or lights are starting to dim, or maybe you're watching your favorite show or movie. Again, just things that are going to help you feel good and relax here is what I would recommend, as long as you can tolerate it. So in early labor, usually this is the time where you will probably be able to handle staying in a position during a contraction, but you might notice as contractions get more intense, you're going to want to move, and that's okay. Again, intuitive movements here are always number one before these labor positions. If you want to be on all fours, so on hands and knees, that's okay too. We can be in something called puppy pose, which is kind of like child's pose in a sense, but we're not bending at the knee so much. So you're thinking from all fours, you're just bringing chest down to the ground. But again, anytime we're in all fours, we want to have your knees wider than your ankles. You can also be having your partner practice some hip squeezes for you while you are on all fours. That's a good position to be in for these. That way your partner can really practice where their hands are going to be. So hip squeezes, counter pressure on all fours are a great one too. And if we're going to be lying down, again, highly recommend resting. I think I've said that probably 10 times now, but just because it is so dang important. So if you are lying on your side, I recommend lying on your left side and maybe having either pillows or a peanut ball wedged between your knees, so that way again knees can be wider than the ankles. Going into active labor, we'll say that's between 5 and 10 centimeters. So active labor, and I'll touch on transition here as well. So active labor might feel more intense and frequent cramping, or your contractions and that tightening sensation. You might become a little bit less chatty and kind of go inward, really focusing on getting into just your groove and your zone of laboring. What do we do during active labor? So again, you're gonna be in your zone. We wanna encourage things that keep you in your zone. So boosting your oxytocin, setting the environment, dimming the lights, playing music, putting on your hypnobirthing track, your essential oils, reading birth affirmations, whatever it is that was a part of your plan. If it feels comfortable, you can continue to eat maybe some light snacks, or just make sure you're drinking water. Again, water with electrolytes is going to be good here, so especially like coconut water is something that's great to have. Or if you can't have coconut water, then you can always do like a liquid IV, or I think even Gatorade makes a package like that that you can just dump into your water that is just extra electrolytes. So continue drinking water here. Set that environment like I was talking about. Start utilizing your comfort measures. So these can be your hip squeezes, TENS unit, hot and cold compresses, whatever it is that you've talked about in that birth plan, this will be the time to definitely start using that. If you are in transition here, so transition is usually 8 to 10 centimeters, but still part of just your active labor stage. So during transition, this is the point that you might end up feeling more discouraged, or saying you can't do something. Things might start to get really hard. I would recommend transitioning into the tub or into the shower. Water can sometimes make all the difference here in the way that your contractions feel, your mindset. So just really, again, utilize your comfort measures and know that you are meant to birth and that you can do this. In terms of labor positions to be here, so in terms of the pelvis, we are talking about the mid pelvis. So that's where baby's going to be descending, is in the middle of the pelvis. So we are in middle of the pelvis as baby's descending. So what we want to do here is anything that is asymmetry is going to make space in the pelvis. So asymmetry is just essentially one leg doing something that the other isn't. So going again into my breakdowns of my labor position, if we're standing, we can have one leg in front of the other. That is one leg doing something that the other one isn't. We can be standing and have one leg up on a stool. again, one leg doing something that the other isn't. We could be doing lunge movements. We could be doing side lunge movements here along with swaying. We could be going up and down stairs or curb walking. So these are all standing positions where one leg is doing something different than the other. In terms of sitting, we can be sitting with one leg up on a stool. You can be on your birth ball, you can be on a bed, you can be wherever. Just even having that birth ball and just kind of swaying back and forth up on a stool, or even if you have like a squatty potty, you can bring that with you, or the hospital might have it. You can be sitting on the toilet that way too. And if you are choosing to be on the toilet here, you can sit backwards on the toilet. So this will continue to have your knees open, one leg up on a stool. So that's even better because now we're still creating space in top of the pelvis and the middle of the pelvis for baby to come down. We can sit on the bed with leaning back against your partner with, again, one leg elevated. In terms of all fours, so if we are on hands and knees, we can maybe have one leg up, kind of like in a runner's lunge position, swaying back and forth. You could be doing, again, your hip squeezes here. And side lying, you could be on your side with your bottom leg straight and your top leg bent, with your knee resting on pillows or a peanut ball. So again, just any movements to be in where one leg is essentially doing something that the other isn't. All right, going into pushing. With pushing, you might start to feel much more intense pressure in your butt or in your vagina. This is totally normal and something that most moms will tend to feel, but it's not a given. Your body might also start to bear down. So when you're going into terms of pushing, you could wait for something called the fetal ejection reflex. So this is actually where your body will naturally push baby out. I heard a lot of moms talk about this actually in terms of like when you need to get sick and you're going to throw up. Is it something that you just literally can't help? Same thing, but going opposite direction of you're pushing baby out that way. So you can do coached pushing. A lot of hospitals, that is just the standard, but just know that you don't have to do that, and you do have the option of just waiting for your body to literally push out baby on its own. You can switch to your breathing techniques here, so really honing in and focusing to those. If you can, have your birth partner remind you to not necessarily hold your breath, but just really think about pushing baby down and out. So that visualization can really help, where you're just imagining baby literally moving down. You're using your abdominals and your breathing to do that. You can do hip squeezes here. These hip squeezes though will be a little bit higher, not so much lower. So that way we can really start to open up the outlet, the bottom of the pelvis, which I'll talk a little bit more in terms of position. But we want to have our ankles out wider than our knees. We want to have an arched back. We essentially just want your sacrum, the back of your pelvis, free to move in order to really create that space for baby to come out. So as far as standing, we can be leaning forward on something, so that would be moving the sacrum so it's out of the way. And if we can have our feet wider than our knees, now we are also opening up the bottom of the pelvis through that internal rotation. So sacrum out of the way, internal rotation, leaning forwards over a bed, over the counter, leaning forward onto your birth partner, onto a birth ball. These are all ways that we can be pushing here in standing position. As far as a sitting position, you can be sitting down on the toilet. This one I would recommend sitting forward, not backwards, so that way we can have knees together, so we can even have one leg up on something. So if we have knees in, leg up on a stool, and we can push that way. You can be squatting. If you're squatting, I really recommend holding on to something here. Squatting can be a tiring position though, so with that being said, you don't necessarily have to do all of your pushing in a squatting position, but if that feels natural and comfortable for you, then you totally can. With squatting, it can also be a little bit more likely to tear in this position. Just another option and things to know with squatting. And if you're on all fours, you can be, again, hands and knees, but knees in, ankles out, or we can be side lying here. So you can easily be laying on the side with maybe your knees closer to your chest. You can have a peanut ball between your ankles here in order to keep your knees more together, your ankles wide, and create space for baby to come out. that's all of my tips on what to do and what to expect during each stage of labor. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe and check in the description below this video for my birth partner support guide, which will go over a lot of the things that I talked about today, as well as labor positions if you want that in just a document, so that way you can have this to refer to during your labor. And I hope that you enjoyed and were able to learn some more and add these to your birth plan. I will see you in the next video. Bye.